Right. Well, since signing up, we've worked hard to develop BDP's sustainability policy. You can see on the left what we've been doing. We've set standards for BDP with the aim of achieving net zero operational carbon of our studios by 2025. We're also making sure that our studios communicate our sustainability ambitions to not only our clients, but also our landlords. We've developed minimum performance standards for healthy materials, for embodied carbon, for operational carbon. And we've also tried to demonstrate the consideration of life cycle in our design proposals. And finally, and perhaps a little more controversially, we're looking at who we work with. And we've set a robust decision to bid framework that considers the environmental track record of our tendering organisations. So what have we delivered so far? Well, we are now calculating the embodied carbon of different options. We're licensed users of the one-click LCA, which assesses embodied carbon, not just of structural components, but also others like building services. We've pushed our studios hard. Our energy consumption in our studios over the last 12 months reduced by about 11%. And we've halved emissions associated with business travel in that period. And we've also promoted more training and development. Here you can see a circular economy workshop going on, and we installed a graffiti wall in our reception in our London studio to share ideas. The Enterprise Centre for the University of East Anglia is a great example of what BDP is delivering. It's a function-led design with a client who gave us a very progressive brief. On this project, we achieved what we call the Magnificent Seven. Passive House certification, BREEAM outstanding. We used bio-based materials. We achieved 25% lower embodied carbon than typical higher education building. We achieved a goal of engaging with local timber suppliers. We designed for a 100-year design life. And we've rolled out soft landings with a 3-year post-occupancy evaluation. So our emphasis here on this project was on low carbon and the reduction of travel distances for construction materials. You can see that a large proportion of materials for the project were sourced within about 30 miles of the site, and each material delivery was traced for the distance travelled to the site. In fact, this approach stimulated regional suppliers and those who don't traditionally work in the construction industry. Most of you will know that in the UK, we typically import about 85% of construction timber. It was only through detailed research and testing that we demonstrated that timber from the local Thetford forest, which is close to the site, could be produced to classification and grade that could contribute to our project. I have to say it was a huge challenge to upskill the local timber industry, which was really producing low-grade timber products, mainly for fencing. And we found that because there's no consistent demand for UK timber, the local industry couldn't or wouldn't invest to move from low to higher grade structural timber. However, we did find a sawmill willing to work with us, and we managed to use local timber for certain elements, visible structures, stairs, exposed roofs, etc. And the timber subcontractor who we worked with subsequently used this initiative to develop their business in secondary timber elements. The building has a thatch panel cladding system, which is an entirely new innovation. You can see here in the picture prefabrication of the cladding panels in local barns, and that of course meant that this element of construction was carried out during the winter months, providing off-season work for thatchers. So it did help reinvigorate what's seen really as a dying industry. And more interestingly, I think it proved that traditional natural material does have its place in 21st century building. In fact, on the left, you can see that the thatch panels were recognised as a work of art by the Royal Academy. Scitec is a very big sector for BDP. This is AstraZeneca's new headquarters in Cambridge. The architect is Herzog and de Moran. The one-size-fits-all code of practice and perhaps an obsession with concrete in labs are making labs some of the least eco-friendly buildings in the UK. So we've taken the three-pronged approach to see how we can improve that. First of all, challenging the brief. So on one of our lab projects, we worked with the client to put all the sensitive equipment on the ground floor, which then reduced the low vibration requirements in the rest of the building and created carbon savings. We're also, secondly, looking at timber. So why would you have a very big concrete slab when you can perhaps do a timber frame and each bench have an isolation deck? And thirdly, we're looking at incorporating available equipment. So you can bring in, for example, air tables to help deal with vibration. Personally, I'm a great advocate for the reuse of buildings as one of the best approaches for sustainability. Those of you who know Victoria Street in London may know this building. It's the Westminster City Council offices. It wasn't the most attractive building, 20 stories, built in 1965, and not a great prospect for future tenants. It was very tired. As usual in these high-rise buildings, the core dictates, but the existing core didn't work for modern day requirements. So we made significant interventions into the core, obviously whilst maintaining the stability of the building. And then we were able to adapt it. We also created connections between floor plates, which required, as you can see on the left here, some significant interventions adjacent to the facade. And we inserted new stair structures into these spaces. And that was really transformational in terms of modern day use of the building. I can't go too far without mentioning the restoration and renewal of the Palace of Westminster. It's that major programme which has been my focus over the last few years. So what does sustainability mean for the programme and how are we addressing it? Well, climate change poses huge challenges to the restoration and renewal programme. As we know, if emissions and temperatures keep rising, we'll see sea levels rise, which could impact the Thames, potentially leading to flooding from the river, rainwater and drainage overflow. On the programme, we're in the early stages of establishing sustainability policy, and it has 5 key focuses. One is conserving and enhancing, so that might mean perhaps enhancing biodiversity on the site, future resilience to adapt to climate change, developing future skills, so there's an ambitious programme for developing and creating skills and talent needed to deliver the project, creating value, so demonstrating the value that the programme brings, and interestingly, caring for people. So this is about setting new standards for well-being through design. So looking forward, there are still obstacles ahead. As far as timber is concerned, fire regulations and buildings insurance, in my mind, do create barriers to using timber in construction. In terms of the functional brief versus the design solution, there are clearly balances in developing the technical function, for example, in labs and the need of concrete, as I mentioned before. And with embodied carbon is becoming more critical as the grid network decarbonizes. So embodied carbon is playing a bigger role in the carbon equation. I talked about embodied carbon. I know the institution has the carbon measuring tools. I think carbon tools really need to be easy to use, so they're adopted widely by the industry. Offsetting, some think that offsetting is an easy get-out clause in the net zero agenda. Are the prices of offsets too low? And my final point really is climate change is a wider problem beyond structural engineering. Obviously, BDP is a multidisciplinary practice, so we have that sort of wider approach. But if you think that structural solutions are perhaps 40% of the problem, I think as structural engineers, we do need to influence everyone else to come on the journey. Thanks very much.
Fantastic and inspiring lecture, I thought, from Michelle. Really good. And now we're going to the other extreme, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a very, very simple person, and this is a very, very simple lecture, and I haven't got the slides that Michelle have got. More bread and butter stuff. So here we go. Since we signed Engineers Declare, we can see there's a big hurdle which we have to jump before our industry can really address the climate emergency. And I want to share our ideas on it, and then if there's support, maybe help to change the system. Anyway, that hurdle is the lack of independent scrutiny in mainstream building projects. And it results in poor design, poor construction, and lots of waste and unnecessary carbon usage. If we don't solve this, then our industry will fall well short of its potential to save carbon and address the climate emergency. In this brief talk, I'm going to explain what the problem is, why independent scrutiny would solve it, and how the problem could be overcome at little cost to government. The problem has several facets. Some builders get frustrated because they think some engineers' designs are increasingly hard to build. Designs that aren't practical cause wasted effort, repair work, and unnecessary carbon usage. And the trouble is that many young engineers find difficulties in developing their practical side as they spend less and less time seeing their designs on site, where their involvement is now often considered unnecessary. Another thing, our industry is wasteful. Remedial work in mainstream buildings, for example, long snag lists at handover, and I'm sure you've experienced them, is so commonplace, it's just an accepted norm. Some commentators even say that effectively 1 in every 5 people in the construction industry is wasting 100% of their time. And waste adds a big unnecessary burden of carbon to everything we do. Now, I'm not criticising any member of the design or construction team, but in the mainstream, most players have to tender silly prices sometimes just to stay in business. And this can stop them from doing their work properly. It's the system that is the problem. Anyway, turning to our designs, even when I've designed to the bone according to the relevant standards, I will still get this, well, we'll be okay if there's a nuclear attack, Simon, just run into your building quip, moaning about over-design. Loads from design standards always have seemed too high, and material properties from design standards seem too low. There are clever people out there who've said that we could use more realistic values. If we did, then we could design lighter structures and save tons of carbon. I don't know about you though, but I'd only be happy doing this if I was sure that our designs would be built correctly. And I see this as a massive risk. So why would independent scrutiny solve the problem? Well, let's put it this way. Although many of us are competent, we're much more likely to stick to the rules if we're subject to independent scrutiny. The Edinburgh Schools incident in 2016 was a good example of the problem. 9 tons of brick were blown onto a pathway used by children. The cause was lack of embedment of wall ties and the omission of brickwork perimeter restraints. Evidence from CROSS, that is confidential reporting on structural safety, suggests that most construction-related incidents reported to them would probably have been avoided had independent scrutiny been present during construction. Currently, the regulator has already got his hands full, being effectively responsible for all of these things shown on my slide. And they still have to find time to do stage inspections of construction. And stage inspections are not enough to prevent problems like Edinburgh. Nobody is required by the regulations to provide proper independent scrutiny. Even if there were enough skilled people available, it would be unaffordable for it to be provided by the regulator. So how can the problem be overcome? Well, a new regulatory systems for buildings is needed. And here's what it could look like. So first of all, I reckon keep the regulator in control of the system. Next, introduce scrutineers, and I'll explain more about them in a moment, to provide comprehensive independent scrutiny of construction. At the regulator's discretion, get the scrutineers to do some of the stage inspections, currently the responsibility of the regulator. Elevate the regulator's on-site team so that they do less stage inspections, but take on a new role. So they would be scrutinizing the scrutineers effectively, randomly auditing them. Things would change. So when a building regulations submission is made, it would need to incorporate something new. And I'm calling this a scrutiny plan. So that people can't cut corners, the scrutiny plan would have to comply with a proposed new British standard. And Working Group 9 has developed a rough draft of one of those. The regulator would review the scrutiny plan, making sure it complied with the new British standard. The scrutiny plan itself would say which parties, i.e. companies, were responsible for all of the bits of scrutiny required throughout the project, not just the stage inspections. It would also identify individuals in charge of the scrutiny of each company and give details of their competence and professional standing. Scrutineers would be people and organisations who are already part of a well-managed project team. So people like clerks of works, members of the design team, including architects, structural engineers, mechanical and electrical engineers, manufacturers and specialist validators, for example, checking piles, fixings or gas-proof membranes. We could also use technology like geolocated body cams for watching the installation of fire stops. Scrutineers would look at construction and issue a standard insurable report on along the lines of what they saw met the design. They'd issue this together with evidence. It's a bit like a structured version of the 60s and 70s when building inspectors worked closely with clerks of works and the design team to see that buildings were built properly. To make them reasonably independent, scrutineers couldn't be from contractors or subcontractors organisations. They'd have to be at least one step removed. Their performance would be audited by the regulator. They wouldn't take any responsibility away from the contractor. They would simply act with reasonable skill and care, and their work would be insurable like any other professional with defined responsibilities. So here's a summary of the system. First of all, the project team uses a new British standard to prepare the scrutiny plan and submits it to the regulator. If the regulator is satisfied, the project starts on site and the scrutineers look at the construction and issue reports. The regulator randomly audits the scrutineers, making sure that they comply with their duties. Then, if the regulator is satisfied that the project is declared compliant with the building regulations, that's it, they declare it compliant. Anyway, I can tell what you're thinking. That's a whole load of scrutiny, and who is going to pay for it? Well, consider this. Which is more complex, a £15 million road or a £15 million building? Well, it's the building, of course. However, in our current system, the road would probably have a full-time resident engineer with a team of staff exercising independent scrutiny over the construction. And this is never questioned, it's just totally normal. The building is different. it would not be unusual to have no independent scrutiny at all, with subcontractors self-certifying their work. Clients pay between 10 and 20 times more for independent scrutiny on civils projects. And this is where the problem really lies. In the new system, clients would incorporate proper independent scrutiny into their projects. It's something that is in their interest to do in any case, but which has been gradually eroded since the Second World War. Now, this idea could help change the whole culture of the building industry. Designs would become more practical and buildable as designers became more engaged with site. As errors are identified during the construction process, site workers' skills would increase, the quality and safety of buildings would improve. As errors reduced, efficiency would improve with big reductions in waste and carbon. Structures would become lighter and cheaper as designers and code writers saw the risk of errors reduce, allowing us to make further significant carbon savings. So to summarise, our full potential to save carbon in this climate emergency is being messed right up by the current lack of independent scrutiny on site in mainstream building. The system needs to change, and it could be done with little cost to government.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Will, and thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Simon. That was great, and I think, as Will says, absolutely a precursor to being able to design lean. We have to know that what we're building will be built well. Integral are a practice of 25. We have offices in Bath and London, so we're at the smaller end of the scale, although not in the 10 or fewer, which I think is a thing that we need as a group. We need to really think about how a lot of these things are done in very small practices. Sustainable design was one of our founding principles, and we spent the early 2000s, as many of us did, doing a really good mixture of new build and conservation and reuse and lots of sustainable design, and then the 2008 recession hit. And suddenly no one wanted to talk about sustainability, and sustainability, in inverted commas, was no longer a selling point. And people thought it meant expensive or strange, hairy materials. And of course it can mean that, but it doesn't have to. So it's such a relief to find we can now shout about carbon again, or lack of carbon, and that we're surrounded by brilliant fellow practitioners trying to do the same thing and sharing our knowledge. As a practice, though, the past year has brought us some challenges as we re-educate ourselves and our staff about how to talk about carbon, and we've had to invest in some more sophisticated tools to calculate our carbon footprints and to relay the information to our clients. So I asked the practice what they found useful in the past year, what had been in their world the successes of the past year. And they said these things. They said developing and using a simple tool we've created to measure carbon quickly at scheme design stage. So this allows quick scheme comparisons at stage 2, which can be reported to the client and allows us to test their appetite for discussions about sustainability. Then we've developed a more sophisticated tool for measuring carbon as the design develops, which allows us to report decreases in carbon as the design is honed. And this is really helpful. If you've hooked your client, then they can start to see that there's a benefit in paying us to do another iteration of design, which we all know will benefit the project. And I mean, obviously in practice, the construction costs should go down as the design is honed and the tonnage of steel frame, for instance, drops, but it's not so specific, and it's subject to more external factors. So the carbon reduction directly rewards the skill of the engineer. We've put sustainability as a chapter heading into all of our templates so that we're prompted to talk about sustainability. It just reminds us whether or not we measure it, we're talking about it in design reports and letters and so on. And that then prompts the conversation with clients and design teams about how each project addresses sustainability more widely, as well as the embodied carbon specifically. And then the last thing they said was that they felt able to ask clients whether they have sustainable ambitions. We found that clients are being pushed to talk about the environment by shareholders or staff or students or their own convictions, but they don't even know which questions to ask, and we can help them to articulate what they would like and let them know when their decisions make a difference. So I asked the guys then what they felt were the obstacles in the last year, and this was their answer for this one. So uncertainty among design team and clients came up. So We work with lots of clients and design teams and contractors who are very comfortable in a world of steel and concrete, a lot less comfortable about, say, timber or CLT. They're concerned about the pitfalls, they're not sure how to price it. We came across concerns about CLT and timber and fire, obviously following the Grenfell disaster. The report that came from the Timber Association last week was very reassuring, that essentially what it was saying was that CLT is fine to use in normal buildings, using charring rates as we've always done, but there's a lot more research to do when we're using CLT in high-rise buildings. And then the last thing they said was that they found obstacles in asking knowledgeable clients to focus on embodied carbon as well as carbon in use. So clients and team members are now really good at and focused on energy in use, which is really important, obviously. And our service engineers colleagues have done a brilliant job at driving down energy in use through client education and through application of technology. And we've now got to do the same journey with embodied energy. And that means re-educating good clients who thought they had it nailed. So I asked them about next year, what they wanted to do in the next year, what our priorities are as a practice. Keeping the momentum up was the key thing. So making sure that we continue to update our in-house technical guidance and specs to reflect the easy wins. Making sure that there's a sustainability chapter in every single template across the whole office. So quality assurance, technical reports, design progress reports, letters, everything, that prompt. And continuing to collaborate as we are today with other practices and other people to share experience and stories and hints. And I spoke at the day one climate conference, and after that had a really useful and interesting conversation with Stephen from Curtains, and we shared some slides that we both use, and it was really helpful. So collaboration between engineers, nominally rivals, but actually we're all in this together. So keeping carbon, the other priorities were keeping reporting carbon savings to ourselves and our clients so they can see the journey from big wins through the material choices at the beginning of a project and then the further wins as the design refines. Increasing our awareness of the practical measures that we can take on a day-to-day basis so that it becomes absolutely second nature to reduce embodied carbon. And also, this is a note to self as much as anything else, measuring carbon on buildings we don't build, because so much of our work is in conservation or reuse, and we rarely reward our clients by telling them how much carbon they've saved by reusing rather than knocking it down and starting again. And we need to find a way of meaningfully telling them how they've saved the world just by holding on to what exists. In terms of obstacles or challenges that we saw in the next 12 months, the first one that came up from pretty much everybody was fee levels, especially in a recession. History tells us that project fees go down as as we all of us race to the bottom to fight to save for our businesses. And in this face of sharpening prices, do we end up in a situation where only the most dedicated make the time to develop new skills and knowledge? I mean, theoretically, additional knowledge should give a market advantage, of course, but are there enough clients really ready to hear the message yet? I'm not sure. So we are concerned that we need to have time. We need to make time to check options and present meaningful information to the clients and the design team, but it needs to be not only the most passionate and dedicated who can do that. Emotional energy came up. Persuading a risk-averse UK construction industry of the changes that are needed and not losing heart when we don't always succeed in building the lowest carbon option. Extending our tools to encompass whole life costing rather than cradle to gate. So at the moment we do cradle to gate because that's where we have the most influence, but we understand that we've got to extend beyond that. And then the last one was engaging the whole team to influence the design holistically. We all know brilliant architects who already understand that low carbon often means expressed building structure, allowing the structure to do the aesthetic work, rather than being a thing that has to be covered up with layers of plasterboard. But not all architects are there yet, and it takes energy to get low carbon buy-in from the whole team. So it is about identifying your allies, as Mike Cooke said in his gold medal address earlier in the autumn. More generally, these are more general thoughts that we have as a practice. As engineers, we work on 3 times as many projects as architects. We have the opportunity to make links between other professions, to introduce a worried QS to a QS who's costed CLT before, or an architect who's used timber frame for housing and is happy to pass on the knowledge and the pitfalls. So identifying other professionals who are passionate about sustainable design and happy to share their experience with people who are theoretically their rivals. So I think it's a lot about making introductions, and sometimes we get the chance to make those introductions to get them to speak to someone in their discipline who's done it before. I am very keen that the I/T has a role to play here, I think, to make it easy for practices to calculate carbon footprints. It's madness that each practice has its own version of a calculator or has to sign up to an external provider. I mean, Michelle mentioned the one-click LCA, which is great if you're a BDP-sized company, or even an integral-sized company. But if you're a company of 5 engineers, that's a very expensive thing to sign up to. So we now have the brilliant I/T publication on how to calculate embodied carbon. So we have a methodology, and to be able to now turn that into a free online calculator, I think would be amazing, so that I can just plug in my stage 2 scheme designs and get some comparisons, plug in a more accurate design at stages 3 and 4, and then on completion to get a really good carbon count. And it needs to be open source, because it's got to be available to every one-man band practice as much as it's available to the big firms. And for us as an organisation, as a climate change group, as people who are really interested in this stuff, who are coming together to talk about it, it gives us the beginnings of a database, so that we've got a much better understanding of what good looks like. And so I think that there is an action here that we collectively would be great to sign up to take. And this is particularly obviously important in the time of economic squeeze, when companies don't have the time necessarily to invest in these tools for themselves. Getting our own house in order. Obviously, we need to continue to educate our own teams as well as the outside world. I know of one big multidisciplinary practice who should remain nameless, signatories to both Engineers Declare and Architects Declare, who sent out a brief for engineers within the last 12 months that contained no mention of sustainability. And we all have those things. I mean, I know for sure that even though my work is personally exclusively reuse and conservation, I know I'm not telling my clients how much carbon they're saving by reusing. So we all need to look to our own houses as well as looking outside and continuing to educate ourselves. But I'm going to say we don't need to be perfect before we start. We can acknowledge our own frailties and failings and still push to do the right thing. Loading codes. I mean, Simon's mentioned this already. I know you've seen these pictures before. This is my bid for repeat until boring. Please, 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 let's reduce the floor loads. I don't know of any reason not to do this. We can't ask individual practices to fight building control for lower loads on individual projects. It wouldn't be appropriate to do so, but we're all bored of these pictures and we know that they're right, and yet we still design to loading codes to madness. So yeah, that was that one. Make friends. So Extinction Rebellion are our friends and our allies. We should be inviting them in, showing them what we're doing, using them to help drive our messages home, get their support for the good practice, and allow them to police our laziness and our loss of focus. And this is pretty much there. One new thing. I know that's not enough, but this is a little bit like starting exercise. It's really hard when you get going to start exercising, but once you're going, it's much easier. And like exercise, it's so much more fun in a group. So make how much carbon I saved last week a game in your office, whatever it takes. And reminding our clients, especially developers who aren't users of their buildings, that the next generation, their customers are demanding change and we can't fail them. And for those who saw my talk 2 weeks ago, I'm going to finish on the same message. Don't let uncertainty deter you. Just give it a go. Thank you very much.
We've had a few questions come in, and I'm sure they're going to keep coming. We've the upvoting system is working, which is great. And I've just sort of pulled a couple of questions out to one side based on that. I'm going to be really cheeky though, and actually the first question I'm going to ask is one that came up at the last conference, but that was never asked or answered, and one that I think, Michelle, off the back of your talk, I think you're very well placed to answer this. So a really quick one then. This is all about changing practice within the design team, and you mentioned a number of changes that you've made with regards to running circular economy workshops, counting carbon and so on. How do you find the additional time within your working practice to undertake these additional activities on projects where presumably the fee has already been agreed and the timescales are the same that they've always been?
Good question. Thanks for putting me on the spot. So, I mean, we're a large practice, and we have a sustainability group who help pull our sort of strategies and work together across the piece. So we do have a particular focus in our company for doing that. I don't think it necessarily costs more money. I mean, we put up a very large graffiti wall in our reception, and the number of ideas and comments that came through that was amazing, mainly from the younger people, I have to say. So we were able to capture that and incorporate it in our sustainability policy. So I think a lot of the energy is there really to do that. I think it's just a matter of pulling it together and implementing it.
And do either the other, Margaret or Simon, do either of you want to chip in on that as well?
Well, I guess for me, it's as I said, I think we should be sharing this. I think we have to share it across practices so that we're not, because at the moment we're all doing these things and we're all doing it individually, and by necessity, then it's only those of us who are prepared to do it in our spare time, frankly, because we think it's too important not to do it, who, you know, and then that's fine. But I mean, I have one dear friend, very good engineer, very sweet man, one-man practice. I talked to him about sustainability, and he just says, I just don't have time, Margaret. I mean, I'm hearing you, but really, you know, and the thing is, if we don't capture those people doing really ordinary, tiny extensions for individual builders, that's, you know, so much carbon is in there. We've got to find easy ways for those people who are at the same time writing a fee letter and fixing the photocopier to engage with this stuff.
I think once you get people in the office talking about it and thinking about it, the whole thing spreads. It's infectious enthusiasm, I think, is what one wants to try and whip up.
That sounds good. We like enthusiasm. I was going to say we like infectious then, but I think in the current climate we're not allowed to say that. We've had a really good question here, and I don't know who wants to go first on it, but it's been upvoted by everybody. So I'm just going to read it out as it's written. If reusing buildings should be the first port of call, how can we ensure that the business plan of the client incorporate that option when sites are often available on the open market and business cases are often decided in advance of the site being bought? Do any of you have any thoughts on that? How do we make reuse the go-to to start with?
If I may start, I mean, I think there's a couple of things here. One is client relationships. So many of us work with repeat clients. So I think in developing those relationships, you can start to get involved much earlier on in the process and perhaps influence decisions. And I think the second thing really is about basically sharing good news. The Enterprise Centre, which I described, has a lot of good news information and stories about it. And I think sharing that with other clients, sharing what's possible with other clients, engages them and perhaps makes them realise that there are other ways or better ways to achieve good results in terms of sustainability.
Margaret, you must have been through this a few times, right? Because you've got quite a track record of dealing with existing buildings. Have you ever sort of promoted those to clients and convinced clients to keep something that they were thinking of throwing away?
Yes, definitely. As Michelle says, it's always easier if it's a client who already knows you. And of course, I'm coming from the that enviable position, if you like, of having a track record in reuse. So they're not surprised when I say, really, do you want to knock that down? Is that a good idea? I mean, we could, but so, you know, there is a start with a position of confidence, I guess. And that is definitely helpful. There's no doubt about it. And we do act as consultants to other engineers on that basis. You know, people who'll say, you know, my client wants to reuse, I don't even know where to start. You know, and of course we'll come and help, you know, even if it's on an external consultancy basis, because that's just the right thing to do. I think the other big thing, which none of us have addressed, and I thought about addressing but didn't, is VAT, of course, because one of the big issues is that we still pay VAT at 20% on reuse and not on new build. And that is a big QSE issue that it sort of feels beyond what we can tackle here today, but is a massive problem.
Yeah, I reckon that one of the key things is don't believe them when they tell you it's cheaper to knock it down and rebuild it, because I can remember a job I had about 10 years ago, and it was some buildings in a conservation area, and the design build contractor really wanted to knock them down and start from scratch, and eventually they weren't allowed to, and they had to keep the buildings and refurb them. And in fact, the whole project, it came out massively cheaper, incredibly cheaper. And what drives this, in my view, is the way that people look at risk. And they think that if you've got something there, they're going to find things that they don't know about. So I reckon one of the key things we can do as engineers is investigate. And the second most important thing is investigate. And the third most important thing is investigate. So investigate. And then you get rid of the risk. And then people can see the real savings, not just carbon savings, but financial savings that they can make in doing that reuse.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before. I think I said it last week, but you know, my job, I know our job is best done if we've done ourselves out of a job by REBA stage 3. That's my aim always on any project, any reuse or conservation project. If I'm walking away at the end of stage 3 going, well, bye chaps, that was fun. That is the perfect project. It's got to be the perfect project, and it rarely happens quite like that. But that has got to be our aim.
So maybe that leads on quite nicely to one of the other questions that's asked by Ollie Broadbent. And Ollie's, you know, he talks a lot about education and changing our skill sets and stuff. So I guess this question was inevitable, but I think it's a really good one, and it leads on quite well. What skills do we need to develop in our engineers then, if we're going to help tackle that second 20 gigatons of carbon that Ed's slide showed? So the 20 gigatons that we can't get at just through efficient design, and we have no idea how we're going to do it just yet. Simon, you've talked about, but don't believe the brief, question the brief, think about other ways to do it. Margaret, again, you know, you're saying let's design ourselves out of a job. What do we need to teach our young engineers to enable them to do this stuff?
There's one really big thing that's unfortunately quite difficult to get experience in these days, and that is understanding how buildings used to be built. Because if you're a doctor and you're trying to make somebody better, you normally know what their anatomy is, don't you? So if you're an engineer and you're trying to work out how to convert a building or improve it or extend it or whatever, you need to understand how it was built. Now, if you're looking at something that's 100 years old or 200 years old, you really need to understand what they were doing in those days, what the materials were, how they built foundations, how they put walls up, how they did roofs, all that kind of stuff. Now, at the moment, that's considered just far too simple for people to understand, and it's left to surveyors. And I really think that building construction is a big thing that our people should be looking at now, you know, so that we can take on this massive challenge that's in front of us. Really, looking at Mitchell's building construction, to a lot of people, it's so lovely looking at the drawings and things like that. I reckon we just need loads more of that.
On the bright side, I was asked to speak at the academics conference about a month or so ago, and my message to them was, we've got to teach all of our undergraduates building engineering history and reuse, because in their lifetimes they're not going to be doing anything else. And I showed them this book, which I recommend to everybody who doesn't already know it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's a really good, you know, it's brilliant, and it tells you how to even start, but you can also dip in and out of it. So you can think, oh gosh, I can't remember about patented concrete. Hang on, let me just, and you can dip in and find it. So it's very well indexed. So it's a very, very useful reference book.
From my perspective, I think on a sort of broader aspect, one of the skills that we probably should develop from a younger age are influencing skills, so that our young engineers grow and develop to speak out articulately, and so they can begin to influence our employers, our clients, and you know, government as well. So we need spokespeople who can do that and say why we should be making change. So sometimes we are a bit of a reticent bunch.
No, that's a really good point, and I therefore cannot pass up the opportunity to mention that on the 6th of November, the IStructE is going to be hosting a sort of a small debate around the art of persuasion and collaboration.
Fantastic.
And we've got Martin Knight, Roma Growell, and perhaps one or two others as well. So some big hitter names and people who know how to persuade others. So do pass that on if you want to upskill some engineers in persuasion and influence, for sure. I'm going to move on to, I'm going to briefly ask a question that's currently the top voted question, because I think it's fairly quick to answer. So the top question at the moment is the IStructE or anyone else petitioning the government to reduce loadings as has been discussed? Because this would make a big difference, particularly to domestic clients. I know that, so I think the short answer is that there are people out there who are being very vocal about this. The IStructE is not, as of yet, petitioning the government on this or anything. We don't, you know, that's not the way we're coming at this. But the things that we are doing is we are working closely with, you know, other institutions such as the Royal Academy to look into all aspects of building design. And of course, loading is only one aspect of this. And I think there's a few articles we've published over the last year that talk about, you know, obvious ways of reducing overuse in the first place. One of these is loading, but the other thing that always comes out on top next to it is overutilization. And I think that, I mean, Simon, you talked before about how even when you design the hell out of your beam to the nth degree, you still get the same old feedback on site of, oh, if a bomb comes, let's go hide in Simon's building. I think it's true. This happens a lot, right? But this is not just about getting the loads, bringing the loads down. This is then designing to whatever the code says design and no more, right? Because we know that bit more is just unnecessary extra. Simon, do you have any sort of views on that you want to share?
Yeah, there's a really interesting thought that I had. Well, I don't know, it was interesting to me anyway. Can you recall BS 5628, which is the masonry design code? Okay, and there were two standards for category of construction control. Okay, one was normal category of construction control, and the other was special category of construction control, where everybody was really careful and did it really properly, you see. Anyway, what happened was, at first, I can remember when the code came out, I can remember thinking, this is brilliant. I can really design down to the bone now. But because people on site knew that, and people in the office knew that it would just never be done, nobody used special category of construction control. Okay, so the message here is, you can change the codes, you can change your partial safety factors, but until you actually get to the root problem, which is what my 10 minutes was about, we're stuffed. We've got to change that. Things have got to be built right before you can implement any of this.
Yeah, and that's about reminding ourselves that construction skills on site are not for the thick who left school at 16. They're for people who have real skills with their hands that are different from academic skills, but are absolutely as important and vital as any other skill.
I think it's also, I mean, it's also about recognizing, of course, that we are one design and construction team, right? So we need to, you know, there's no barrier of us and them. I mean, I've had contractors pick us up on design ideas that were just awful ideas and say, why the hell aren't you just doing this? We'll build it quicker, cheaper, with less material. And we sit around as a design team and go, oh yeah, that's clever. You know, we're in this together. It's one team of people, and we're trying to work towards the same end goal here. So I think that getting it right on site is as important as getting it right in the office on the drawing board. But of course, we can all help each other achieve both of those things. Yeah. I think we shouldn't lose sight of that.
The thing is, Will, it used to be possible when I was a lad to go out on site, spend 2 hours talking to a bricklayer and watching him putting wall ties in and mixing up mortar, just working out how they do it, you know? And then you could come back into the office and you'd know not to make stupid errors in your design. There's just not the facility to do that now. You know, we're not allowed on site half the time. And when we are, it's just a quick whiz and a quick whiz off. You know, that's why I'm so passionate about making this change.
Yeah, and I think some people would argue you still are a lad, Simon. So final question, because we've only got a couple of minutes left and then we need to take a break so everyone can go and get a cup of tea. Before I ask the final question, there's a request come up about 6 times now. Margaret, please can you type into the chat the title and author of the book you held up so that everybody can go and find it immediately after this.
I don't know.
Okay. Maybe you could hold it up again to the camera, and then I can type it in afterwards. So structural aspects of building conservation.
Of building conservation, and it's Paul Backman, but it's been updated by Robert Bowles. So you want that edition? I think it's the 2nd edition.
Fantastic. Okay, and then just to final question to sort of close the session, and maybe Michelle, you'd like to give your thoughts on this first. The question's come up a few times now. How do we make sure that we are working together to do things with one vision? So we just talked about contractors and designers, but obviously, you know, it's a far more broad spectrum than this. Do you feel the entire industry understands what things like embodied carbon really means, and how can we go through this process together to sort of make the fastest progress we can? What do you think?
Okay, well, I mean, it's interesting because I'm obviously from an interdisciplinary company, so sort of collaboration is in our nature. So from a design perspective, I think certainly we do work together in my company, but I think we've got a long journey to go on basically to achieve that sort of collaboration across the industry. I would really like to see contractors engaged much earlier in the design process. I think that's one thing that I could recommend. I would definitely want more conversations, even, you know, in sort of concept or certainly scheme design where ideas are forming, so that we can make sure things can be built more easily and efficiently. So.
Yeah. And back in the day, you know, we used to spend a year on site.
Yes, we did, and
let's do that now.
Yes, we don't. We've lost that, and if anything, over the past years, we've become more fragmented and divorced. Yeah. So, yeah, our younger engineers are perhaps spending less time on site, which, in my personal opinion, is not a good thing.
Great, thank you. Any final closing comment from any of you who feel you've really missed the boat and you want a final 10 seconds to say something? No, fantastic. Okay, so with that then, we'll bring the first session of the morning to a close.